Okay, everyone. Today is gonna be a relatively short class. We're gonna we can keep this one pretty tight and wrap up quick since it is, after all, Valentine's Day, and actually since we're running a little bit ahead in the course schedule. Um, we'll go through pretty quick today. We'll just kind of cover a few things, maybe mention a couple points from the homework that I've heard a few people struggling with, kind of look at where we're at so far and where we're gonna go, and then probably just call it good for the day. Um, if you if you go and look at the syllabus on our class WIO courses page, um, you can see, and I'll pull this up here. All right, we'll zoom in a little bit. If we look at the old schedule, we are up to 2.1, or actually, yeah, we're up to 2.1. We should be doing 1.6 today, but we finished that last Friday. So we're up to 2.1. We've got a semester break on Friday. That's in the UYO academic calendar. I think that's like a relatively new thing. Either way, you got a nice 3-day weekend right there. I think that's, I don't know, is that for President's Day? Something like that. Um, Real nice for me because I actually have a President's Day off at my other job on the following Monday. So we have 2.1 split up kind of weird between the 16th and the 21st there. Um, we could start it today, but then we're really splitting that across kind of a long time, and we'll end up running far enough ahead that it'll kind of get annoying. So we'll just take it nice and easy, nice and good, and really start getting into exam two, or start getting into the material in section two, which will lead us into exam one. So the basic flavor of what we're going to be doing, we'll talk about that in a moment. But right now, just where we're at in the class, we're through the first chapter of the book. We've talked about the basic properties of complex numbers. We've gotten a pretty good idea of it, and we've gotten through the first 3 homeworks of our 14 homeworks. All right, and by the end of this week, we'll be through 4, and then by the first exam, we'll be through 7 of them. We'll be through, amazingly, half of the homework in the class by the first exam. If you notice, if you look at the schedule here, there's kind of a lot of homeworks at first before the first exam, and then there's fewer homeworks before the second one, and then there's even fewer still before the final. Um, the first exam will be more difficult than the homeworks, mainly because I'm grading you on whether or not you're actually correct. But all things considered, I don't think it's going to be um, particularly bad if you've been keeping up with things. The homework, the third homework, remember, is due tonight. We moved that back, so everyone had another Monday, another weekday to work on it. I have, I'm pulling this up here. Let me recompile this. There we go. I have some nicely teched up answers here for us that I will post to the Class WoW course page tonight after um, the due date has passed. You can all check it out there. I have noticed, looking at accesses to files, that I don't think a number of people have looked at any of the keys so far. If you haven't looked at any of the keys so far, I do highly recommend that you go through and you actually check to see that, look at the key, look at how I went and solved it. And I'm not saying necessarily that every way I did it is like the best way. Sometimes there are cleverer ways than what I end up doing in here. And I try to go for reasonable solutions. Sometimes there are like really smart ones you can do, right? But I'm trying to, like, if it's too far off from what most people will write, then it's not necessarily useful to everybody. So if you're doing fancy tricks, okay, maybe, who cares? But it is useful to look and see, whether or not what you're doing matches up with it. I try to make everything very well justified. And yeah, hopefully that has been helpful. If you haven't looked at it yet, I do encourage you to read the comments on your homeworks. I've been leaving some there. I will slowly drop off on leaving comments as we get a little bit further on into the class, particularly after the first exam, once everyone has more of a sense of what I expect from your written work. at that point you'll have an example of how I grade your problems, and then we won't have to. I won't have to write as many comments unless you want them. Um, but anyways, let's look at where we're at so far in the class and where we're gonna go. Um, by the way, for anyone who is here live, if there are any problems on the homework that you want me to go over, please let me know in the chat, and then we can go over those ones. But before we get into just doing examples and doing whatever people need some extra work with, let's talk a little bit about the content of this class for a minute. So far, and this is just the table of contents from your textbook, a great roadmap of what we'll see. So far, we've gotten through sections 1.1 through 1.6. We introduced complex numbers. We looked at basic properties. We introduced functions you are familiar with. Talked a little bit about the topology of C and just in general the topology in general. And then we got into what it means to be complex differentiable and how to differentiate things. And that's where we're at right now. What we're going to do next is we're going to do the obvious next part of calculus. In fact, that's one of the things I like about this textbook. It is laid out very similarly to a regular calculus textbook. So the next thing after differentiation would naturally be integration. If you've taken Calc 3 or something like that, you are probably familiar with the ways that you could do integration on, like a two-dimensional space. So it maybe doesn't seem like a strange thing to do integrals over C. If you haven't, then maybe it does seem weird. The way we'll begin, though, and the way that will end up being most useful is to essentially recover a lot of good old-fashioned Calc 1 integrals. And the way we'll do this is by, and this is the cool and fun little tricks of it all. The way we'll do this is by integrating along little line segments. So let me pull up a small GIF for you here. And this is where it ends up being kind of fun. The various ways. Well, maybe I'll have to pull it up next time. For some reason, I think my browser is blocking this GIF. Oh, okay. I had it here, but all right. 1 second then. Anyways, I'll sketch it because we'll be going into some other stuff. We'll talk about Koshi's theorem in particular. This will be a big and important theorem, and Koshi's theorem has to do with contour integrals. It has to do with integrating along certain curves. And so the idea is that you can recover things from, here I'll pull up even another copy of the textbook. We can recover things from regular old calculus by looking at curves in C, these one-dimensional little lines, and integrating along them. And the particularly important types of curves will be closed loops. That'll be a very big deal. We'll want to talk about, like, okay, well, you might have a curve, but there's maybe multiple different ways you could travel across it, different parameterizations of the curve. This is obvious in the sense that, like there are roads from point A to point B, between two addresses or something, and it might take you different amounts of time to get there. You can drive at different speeds down these curves. And so we'll talk a little bit about the various ways that we could come up with nice integrals along paths and whether or not the parameterizations matter. Then after that, we'll begin to talk about the important fact, and this is one of the most important things that we will end up using in this class. It'll do a lot of heavy lifting. It tells us that simple closed curves, this is the picture to pick the picture to think of is this bad boy right here. It's something where you just start, you go boop boop, um, it doesn't, just like a loop or some kind of deformed loop, but it doesn't like pass through itself and isn't, it goes back to where it started at some point. If you take analytic functions and you do this nice integral along these things, you get 0. Um, this is going to end up once again in a very fancy way being a consequence of the Cauchy-Riemann equations. Kind of sensible. So we'll get this basic idea, and then we'll start to learn about the other things you can do when things get a little bit more complicated, other ways to look at it, what the various regions that something could be analytic on imply for integrals about stuff. We'll start to talk a little bit about various different notions of deforming paths continuously, whether or not the path itself matters or just its endpoints, whether the space the path is in, how that influences things, whether there are holes in it or not. How can closed curves detect holes? The nice idea is that you kind of can get a closed curve stuck on a hole, right? The closed curve can encircle the hole, and you can you can't really drag it away from the hole. You get stuck on the hole. And so closed curves can tell you something about little holes in domains. And as we know from looking at like analytic functions, think even simple stuff like rational functions. When things go bad and analyticity breaks, can have to do with places where certain things are undefined, like where you have zeros in the denominator. And this kind of thing we'll be able to pick up using closed curves and various integrals, and we'll talk about what it means and what it tells us about functions. This will let us build slowly into more and more complex little pieces, more and more fancy ways to talk about breaking apart regions and going around things, and as you can start to see these complicated looking things, and what it starts to look all weird, but don't worry, it ultimately isn't. It just is basically versions of the same thing. So this will be when we start to get into it'll take a little while. They'll do quite a bit here, but this will be when we start to get into the more interesting forms of Cauchy's theorem. And as you can see from some of these pictures, conformality will end up playing a role again, and we'll have a lot of fun. And that will be chapter 2. After this, after chapter 2, which does go on for quite a ways, we will get into series representations, something that we've hinted at for quite a while, and we'll actually begin to discuss a lot of the things that we've promised that we'll actually eventually get to at some point in there. Then 4 and 5, we'll do a variety of other things. We'll talk about residues. We'll talk about conformal mappings some more. We've already talked about conformal mappings a little bit. Various transformations, and then we'll finish out the course with analytic continuation. And that's the top down. I want everyone to remember kind of where we're at so far and where we're going. And, pause for a moment before we go into the next chunk. I don't see anything in the chat, any particular questions that people had. My guess is that the places where people maybe we're struggling with this homework. We'll just do a few places from this current homework that's due tonight. My guess is that some of the places where people are struggling, if emails or things to go off of, have to do with the inverse function theorem. We discussed this last time. There's just one little trick I'll kind of remind people of. So let's think of this, because this is a very, when you see it, you'll be like, oh, okay. And I won't give you the whole thing, but just recall that the the inverse function theorem tells us that if f, a function from a to c, is, I should say if f from A to C is analytic, and I don't know why I'm writing it such a slant here, and f prime of some z is non-zero, then there exists neighborhood U contained in A of Z and V contained in C of f of Z, such that, and I'm going to use a slightly bit different terminology right here, such that, and I'll write it as f sub z, this function from U to V is a bijection. Actually, maybe I'll even, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, such that f from U to V is a bijection. And f inverse is analytic with f inverse its derivative given by 1 over f's derivative. Okay, that's fine, good. But the idea here, the important thing is to know, like what I'm going to try to give you for problem number 3, which asks us to use the inverse function theorem. Problem 3 says this. Use the IFT to show that if f prime z not equal to 0 for all z in A, then f sends open sets to open sets. So the image of an open set under F is an open set yet again. And I think some people are really struggling with the fact that this is that the inverse function theorem up here, this guy is local. So, and I think the real confusion comes from just the very obvious, the very simple, if you think about it, but like maybe it kind of throws you off for a second. This very simple fact that this, let me switch colors. This f right here and this f right here are different f's. They agree point-wise. You plug in any value in U and you get the same thing out. But notice f takes values in A and sends them to C, while this f down here takes values in U and sends them to V. It's kind of like the function f of x equals x squared, right? That guy is a different function if your domain is the real numbers than if it's the complex numbers, right? It's kind of the whole point of this class, is that polynomials act a little different in the complex plane than they do in the reals, right? So this is this really, if we were being very accurate, we should maybe write something like f of fz. There exists a function fz that's a bijection, and fz in this guy is analytic. Where f of z, oops, that looks like a delta, f of z, fz of, maybe I should write a different term, fz of, you know, y, or I shouldn't use y, I should say like omega or w or something, equals f of w for all w in u. So the idea is that it's a different function. Every point at which you have a non-zero derivative, you get a different function. So that's the thing to think of right there. But the idea is that being a bijection, and once you see it, you'll be like, oh my God. The idea is if you take f z, which is just f, right? It's just, I mean, it's the same thing as taking f, right? Of u, you'll get v. And really, because these guys are also relative to your choice of z, we should maybe label all of these guys as uz and vz, right? You know, if that makes sense. All of these guys are relative to our point of, or our choice of point right here, right? So fz of uz is vz, right? Because it's a bijection. We get everything in there. Okay. Notice uz is in A. So if this holds for every z in A, right? Then notice you could write A, and this is the big hint, as say like a union of z's in A of uz, and then you could look at say like f of A. Well, that would be f of this union, right? And that would just be, and here's the piece that maybe people were not sure if they could justify, the union of z and A of f of uz. And that's, well, it's fc, so that's just going to be the union of z and A of vz. And you might know something about unions of open sets, right? I should really say then there exists, and actually I should be clear, an open neighborhood uz and an open neighborhood vz, open neighborhood as well. But yeah, so that's the little trick right here. If you're struggling with that one, think about it, and you'll be able to get it out of there. If you're wondering, but this only really maybe helps me with f of A. Notice that if it works for A, then you could certainly restrict f maybe to like any other open set inside of A, right? And then get the exact same thing. So I don't know. Try that out. See if that helps. I'm not seeing any other questions here in the chat, though I wish I was. Let me check my email and make sure that no one else has sent me any in email. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything right now. So anyway, that I think was the one that people were struggling with most. I will say that it's totally fine with me if you, when you're doing some of the harmonic function ones, I encourage you to try to think of clever tricks that make it so you don't have to type absolutely everything up, or I mean, not type everything up. Like plug and chug everything out. There are ways for at least one of them where you don't have to, really do any computation. You can just use a theorem. But if you want to, you can definitely use things like Wolfram alpha to compute derivatives. Don't spend a massive amount of time trying to find second derivatives of rational functions and give yourself a migraine. It is totally fine to outsource your Calc 1 computations to the computer. I trust that you know how to do that sort of stuff. Anyways, yeah, that's probably all I have for the homework right here. It's a pretty short one. The next homework is due next Monday. It will cover 1.6, but it is similarly pretty short. It's not too terrible. I encourage you to start that one early because I think the first question might, but yeah, it won't trip you up. It'll be fine. But yeah, all right, cool. I'm not seeing any other questions. I guess this is one of the downsides of doing class online, because if you have questions, it's a little bit more difficult to answer on the fly like this. But yeah, I'll just let everyone go enjoy their Valentine's Day, and I'm going to go make a pizza and hang out with my wife. Have a good one. Send me an email if you have any questions, and I'll help you out. But if not, awesome. Talk to you later.